Voters in Boston will choose new city councilors this year for 3 districts. One of them is District 1, currently represented by Sal LaMattina. The district includes East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End Waterfront. Our guest is one of the candidates running for the seat in the preliminary election, Tuesday, September 26th. We'd like to welcome Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us, Lydia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Until recently, you were the head of the mayor's housing stabilization effort. Talk about what you were doing there.
So as the deputy director for the Office of Housing Stability, I was essentially trying to come up with ways to help keep our middle class, our working class Bostonians, our long-term residents in Boston with the development boom. So looking at ways in which we could either pilot programs, look at all of the parts of the building, the attics, basements, looking at policies that we have pending, tax credits, looking at ways in which we can really bring homeowners, property owners, tenants, and developers to the table to really come up with sustainable solutions.
Well, also an interesting background is your involvement in legislation, which is one of the jobs of a city councilor.
True.
You were involved in legislation at the State House to help domestic workers.
Yes, yeah, the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. Yeah, that was a sweeping set of civil rights protections for nannies, house cleaners, and care workers to assure that they were really treated as employees like everybody else and given respect and dignity, and now have a right to a written contract. They have discrimination protections, and we're really proud of that effort. That's really probably what got me into politics, actually.
So how do you see lifting what you learned from that into the job of the city councilor?
I think one of the best things I learned from that experience was how to talk to folks who maybe at the superficial level I would think disagree with me. So one of the best things, what I'm really proud about, is actually having, I think all of the senators in a unanimous way support our legislation, and that was across party lines. So really understanding how to get to the point of the legislation or the reason why someone should support something without really acknowledging or really even caring about what their party affiliation is. I really enjoyed that, being able to negotiate and set a table where we actually had employers testifying for the legislation. Again, figuring out the perspective, their interests, and really demonstrating how they're really in common and that we don't need to fight through this. We can actually come up with a solution together.
Well, you've been involved in one issue that's still, I think, pending before the City Council, and that's on whether to increase tenant protections with just cause evictions.
Right.
Some property owners are pushing back. They say this
True.
ties their hands too much. What would you do if that came up today and you were on the council?
So on the council, I think I have a little bit more autonomy. And so on the council, I understand a little bit, well, I'm a property owner, I'll put that out there, and I'm also a landlord, right? So I think one of the things I would bring with me is that very unique perspective of being a tenants' right advocate, but also owning property. And so I've had horrible tenants, and I've had some really great ones as well. And I'm the first homeowner in my household, or in my family, so I understand the importance of having property, it being my investment, it being my retirement. And so what I think is very important for the city to do is, again, set the table. Small property owners need to be at that table. And so what I would suggest actually for any legislation that advances tenants' rights is that there are firm carve-outs for very small property owners, and that be very clear in the legislation that we're carving out folks with maybe less than 10 units. And I also think as a real fair balancing of the equation for property owners like myself, where my tenants pay my mortgage, when a tenant chooses to withdraw or withhold rent, I think it's very important that we provide a protection and require them to escrow that rent. Again, it should be an incentive for me to do something, but also if you're a small property owner, you don't want to fix the problem and then turn around and have nothing there. So that's what I would do a little bit different, maybe as a city councilor. And if the legislation were to come up, those are the kinds of things that I would propose be really integrated within that. Other parts of just cause eviction was the notification of tenants of their rights, which I firmly stand by, and I think that's important. I also think a lot of small property owners really don't know about other resources they have beyond eviction. So when we were to notify, let's say an eviction is about to happen and I would need to pass that information to the city then responds with a packet of information to the tenants, but then maybe also a packet of resources to the landlords, mediation, a packet of information for legal advice, anything. Because a lot of times people are evicting because they don't know what else to do. And I don't think anybody's hands should be tied. Eviction is a horrible process. It's expensive for both parties. And so what we want to do is, again, reset that table.
This is BNN News. We're talking with a candidate for District 1 on the Boston City Council, Lydia Edwards. Lydia, in one part of the district in East Boston, you might have a lot of people clamoring for affordable housing. Over in Charlestown, there is a plan to leverage reconstruction of public housing by allowing more market rate housing. The question there is, how much can you build without creating a traffic problem?
I think that there's a lot more to the questions. Actually, there's a lot of questions. It's the One Charlestown project. And I think the goal, ironically, I when I was talking to folks, I thought when I was knocking on the doors and meeting with folks who all have different opinions about this, there's one thing that they all agreed on. And that was that they wanted to redo the housing projects, the BHA housing. Everyone agreed on that. And yet here we are in this part of tension where there's such a how to do it has really lost the goodwill and the political will of the town. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think it has a lot to do with process. One person suggested that that the city should really push for more listening sessions and maybe less hearings. And they really want to make sure that they're part of the future of Charlestown, not that the future is arriving to them. And so when I look at the One Charlestown project, there's been some questions about the 2-to-1 ratio and has the city really justified that you need 2 market units for 1 affordable unit? The other question is, did we really build, or are we even considering the middle class? Those that are too rich for the BHA housing, but cannot afford market rate, and was there no room for them? The folks who might be building those things, building those units, may not even be able to afford to live in them. I would propose looking at the size, maybe reducing it, but also coming up with a pathway for ownership within the One Charlestown plan, maybe a rent to own, a way in which people, even on Section 8, that they can gain equity. I think ownership is really the key to stabilization in any way, shape, or form.
Another big challenge in this district is parking, partly because you have a certain number of cars per household, but also because some parts, they depend on commercial use involving cars,
Right.
Especially like the north end. What would you like to see done differently?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, I think if you pull back, there's a matter of planning. When developers come in with a plan for any entity, a restaurant, the housing, there really needs to be a justification and an explanation for how they're going to provide the infrastructure for that plan, including parking. And what I'm finding oftentimes is that the residents of the North End, Charlestown, and even East Boston are feeling the burdens of the parking of the new developments. And so I think that we need to shift who has to deal with that headache more. And it's really different, right? So in East Boston, there are folks who have these 2-hour parking limits. In many cases, their family and friends are unable to visit them because they're afraid of getting a ticket. And so I would like to honestly look at, in East Boston at least, ways in which we can look at visitor passes that our sister cities in Cambridge and Somerville are using. In the North End, I think it really does come down to the planning of our projects and our commercial spaces in a real way that is welcoming, but is not placing the burden on the long-term residents. And so if that means we need to look at different parking enforcement, if that means we need to bring back strict resident parking enforcement, then that's what that means for the North End. And then Charlestown, we're also looking at enforcement issues as well. A lot of people just come home and, well, they don't know where to go.
There's also a very big environmental question in this district, especially around expansion that's been proposed for Logan Airport. What's the city councilor's job going to be in that?
So I think the city councilor has an interesting job in all of these big kind of picture planning areas. A lot of folks would like to just stick maybe with the nuts and bolts and the potholes, but in reality, you're going to be the first call, right? The first call that a lot of folks make will be to their city councilor. And I think one of the best things the city councilor can do is to empower the community to feel that they are heard, and when there are tables to be set, to assure that they are able and invited to come to them. And that means not just with the mitigation planning and assuming that, okay, well, expansion is going to happen, and therefore we should just fight to get maybe more computers or maybe more payments for something else, but really questioning, is this the best thing for my community, and is there really no alternative? Is there no way to build more at our Logan Express sites? Have we really given up on the red and blue line connector? And really pushing back and asking for my community's sake, have we really exhausted all of these options? Why is this the go-to?
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for this time.
Candidate for Boston City Council in District 1, Lydia Edwards.
Thank you.
We'll have more news in just a moment.